Welcome to How to Share, a podcast about collaboration in our families, friendships, at work, and in the world. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, we are going to replay some aha moments. I learned a powerful lesson about 25 years ago when I climbed Mount Ixtaccíhuatl in Mexico. The guides brought along a roll of crepe paper, lightweight, colorful, and paper, not plastic. At every decision point, they tied a small bit of crepe paper to a tree branch or stick. When I asked for more detail about route finding, a guide told me that when we make the choices about which fork to take, we often forget to turn around and look at what it will look like coming back. He pointed out that the light, the contrast with the surroundings, the angle, it all looks different on the return. What we think is memorable going one way looks completely different when we turn around. This rings true for me in life as well. I'm often so focused on the route ahead that I forget to take a moment to reflect on what I've learned. When I do pause, I find that looking back at the choices I've made or the aha moments that have mattered help me to take them in more deeply. So in this episode of How to Share, we have a playlist of some of the incredible insights that have been shared in the last 16 episodes. These clips remind us that to collaborate, we need to know ourselves, remember who we are talking about, and convince anyone, including ourselves. We need to be able to tell a passionate story. I know you'll love it. We start off this recap with insights about leadership. In talking about why we share, we look at Brené Brown's research on vulnerability and leadership as it relates to sharing. Researcher, professor, and author Brené Brown has written extensively about vulnerability. In her book, Atlas of the Heart, she publishes the results of when she asked tens of thousands of people to provide examples of vulnerability. I've picked 12 examples related to sharing. Remembering that leaders don't have all the answers, but ask important questions, like apologizing to a colleague about how I spoke to him in a meeting, and giving and getting feedback. But Brené goes on to explain that vulnerability is a key part of courage and leadership. In her words, in my most recent research on courage and leadership, the ability to embrace vulnerability emerged as the prerequisite for all the daring leadership behaviors. If we can't handle uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure in a way that aligns with our values and further our organizational goals, we can't lead. This is a great segue to tech executive Doug Hauger talking about creating team environments where people can admit they cannot make it. Using a climbing analogy, we discuss how failures are opportunities to learn. You mentioned Mount Baker at the very beginning, and I kind of laughed about it because that was one mountain that I didn't summit that you did. And,
Yeah.
I didn't feel well, and I needed to be able to say that so that I wasn't weighing the team down.
If you're not going to make it to the top, you better be clear about that. And you're not going to pull the rest of the team down.
Mhm.
But that puts you in a place of vulnerability. Nobody wants to fail.
Right.
But you have to look at it, and this is the way I looked at it, is it's not failure. It's the same in business or climbing. You're on a journey. You're going to get there. If you don't get there, you're going to learn from it. That in
Right.
and of itself is a success.
Yeah.
If you take it to the next experience and understand, oh, I have to climatize differently, or I have to take different proteins with me and carbohydrates, and I've got to get fueled, and et cetera, or we negotiate with this partner or this customer in a different way. We didn't get to yes that time. We're going to get to yes next time. And sharing that with people who are new to the experience is so, so important.
Corporate communication specialist Brian Hannon tells us how to keep our audience in mind when communicating to a broad audience.
It's helpful to think about your messaging and who needs to hear it first. Again, this could be a big corporate thing. This could be members of a committee. I mean, in terms of thinking about, it doesn't have to be an email or a newsletter. It could be just simply, I want to make sure that I'm reaching out to Jane and telling her this is happening before I tell anyone else. It's almost a sign of respect. Oftentimes with like corporate messages, my pushes, let's talk to our senior leaders, and it may be a meeting, what have you. Let's talk to our leaders, let's talk to our people managers. Then let's start to reach out to maybe our client-facing employees and employees overall before we ever go public to customers or to clients.
Yeah. Customer experience strategist Carl Beisch talks about the who, what, when, where, how, and how much of data to gather to provide insights. Often it comes down to collaborating with the client to make sure you understand the business questions they are trying to answer.
You had asked, how does a background in writing lead you to where you are? And I think one of the things that I've taken away from that experience is like who, what, when, where, why, how, and in terms of data, how many. So, like who's the client, who's the customer, where are they talking? Where are you going to get this data from? How much data do you have? When do you need these things?
Right.
When you're doing an analysis in terms of research, sample sizes and volume, it's how many, but then understanding when you have an edge case that might actually be something that's important. And so I think it really comes down to collaborating with whoever your client is and making sure that you understand the business question that they're trying to answer.
There's a natural follow-up between asking the right questions and listening. So in the next clip, author, educator, and my co-host, Dr. Vicki Atkinson, explains why hearing others can be such a powerful tool.
I think when people realize that you have paid attention enough that you can ask a question that comes from a knowing place, you can see a shift with someone, especially if you're in a situation where there's a level of anxiety or nervousness, an interview, a first encounter, a high stakes interaction in the workplace, where you're trying to bring two sometimes opposing views together to find common ground. When you can acknowledge something that the other person is bringing and however you say it, give value to it. And I often, because it's my word of choice, I often say, and it depends on the context, maybe I wouldn't be as free with this, but I often will tell people when they're sharing things with me and it's personal, that I love that, or that I see that, or I feel that too. Because I think we need that connection. The person who's speaking needs to know that they've been seen, that their words were understood.
We also have to discern what should and should not be shared. So in this clip, I talk about what goes into decisions we make about how to share.
We're told to share from an early age, but never really taught how to. So I started digging into the why of sharing and how to do it. I know one of the first questions that comes to mind is, what kind of sharing are we talking about? Toys, tools, files, space, calendars, meals, the planet, all of it. We do it professionally and personally. In boardrooms and in bedrooms, we tease out our willingness and ability to share. We tell our kids to share with their siblings, their friends, and strangers. All the while, we are working out how to do it best ourselves. I know from my years of experience helping people collaborate, there's a lot that goes into sharing anything. For example, anytime a new file location goes live, we create a matrix of audiences and permissions. What goes where and who can read, write, and control it.
Blogger and retirement specialist Michelle Oram reminds us that when sharing life's challenges, it's okay to remember the story is about the person with the challenge.
Yeah, and I do think that that's one of the key differences between sharing personal health information, or in your case, the death of your father, and sharing in the corporate sense. Because one of the things I've always sort of said about when it's your personal information, it's your story, and you are the most important thing in that conversation, right? It's not about them. And unfortunately, some people do tend to make it about them, and that's always a challenge. But it's not about them. You need to be sensitive to the fact that it's hard for them to hear it. But at the same time, you have to look after your own self-interest, because ultimately you're the one, I remember somebody saying, you're the one rowing that rowboat and you're the one in there by yourself having to deal with this, right?
In this clip, I talk with banker Jill Jones to discuss ideas of what does and doesn't work in our daily password management scenarios.
And I know that my family that had to deal with the address book really struggled with it. So we're finding that's not the best method.
Well, we were talking about that because my method is to write everything down in a spreadsheet, but my spreadsheet is password protected. And I haven't told anybody the password.
That's a good one.
Well, yeah. What good does that do anybody?
I just received a pretty good suggestion, actually. There is a service out there, and I learned this through estate planning, and now that we had a sudden death in my family, I'm getting a little more serious about taking care of my situations. But there, you can rent a vault, a digital vault, and put your will in there and things like that. So it's not like a lock box, a safe deposit box. It's actually a digital box, and you could certainly put your passwords in there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. On the lighter side, PR professional Eric Knudsen sums up our collective willingness to laugh by explaining that most people have a sense of humor, even if they don't generate a lot of it.
I think everyone thinks they have a sense of humor, and some people have better than others. And certainly I think that there are people, I would say that not everyone generates a lot of humor, but because I know people who have a sense of humor and they recognize it and appreciate it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're cracking jokes or being funny themselves. And then, I'm sure you've certainly met people who think they are much funnier than they actually are. I think there's very few people who are philosophically opposed to humor at all levels. Again, it may be disagreements on what's funny or when humor is appropriate or not appropriate, but I think that not very many people are anti-humor.
San Francisco Chronicle reporter Steve Rubenstein reveals why 13 miles per hour is the best speed to experience life. You and our mutual friend Eric rode across the country together.
We did. We rode bicycles from Seattle to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2006.
Yeah.
Which was one of those great, great summers where you're only worried about, did I make the right turn and am I going to run over a piece of glass? Every other concern you left behind at the starting line. It was kind of wonderful.
Yeah, but you wrote about those adventures too.
I did. I had taken the time off as vacation, and the editor said, you found out about it. I said, you really going to ride your bike across the country for 2 months? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, why don't you write stories about it? And I said, well, then it's not vacation, is it? He said, no, I guess not. I said, you're going to leave me on the clock for 2 months to ride my bicycle? This was one of those great scams in the newspaper business that occasionally you got to cash in your chips a little bit. And anyway, I did. And I got to, I filed a story every few days from the road. But I was aware at the time that riding a bicycle across the country is not that unusual of a thing. It was unusual for me, but people do it all the time. And I tried to keep the focus on what I was coming across, not on the fact that, I was riding a bicycle. Getting to Mount Rushmore involved climbing a lot of hills. But when I got to Mount Rushmore, I found a guy sitting in the gift shop who was selling his memoirs of carving Lincoln's nose with 12 tons of dynamite. And I asked him what it was like to carve Lincoln's nose with 12 tons of dynamite. And I certainly would rather read that than what it was like to pedal uphill to get to the guy who carved Lincoln's nose with 12 tons of dynamite. I mean, the act of riding a bicycle is wonderful. And slows the world down to 13 miles an hour, which is the proper speed of encountering things. Jet planes are too fast. Walking is a little too slow. 13
Right.
miles an hour is about the right speed.
Right.
Uh, it was a wonderful trip. I enjoyed every
Yeah.
pedal stroke.
Right. Did you come up with any grand observations about the country as a whole, seeing it that way at
It's
13
full of
miles per
wonderful
hour?
people. It's full of wonderful people. Then you go across the country and you don't see red and blue. You
Mhm.
just see nice folks.
We covered being self-aware with a few episodes on knowing oneself and how to share optimism. Mark Petruska and I explored the concept of optimism, including the blind spots that sometimes occur. As Wanda Pierce said, you know what's funny? When you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags.
Well, I'm really optimistic that this podcast is going to have great results.
Me too. How could it not?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. I didn't even think about bringing on a pessimist. So, that probably is my blind spot, is that sometimes I don't think of the flip side, the downsides. I've always said
Right.
that my optimism has made me, often it's not good for planning traffic.
Mhm.
It's sometimes been bad in dating.
Yes.
Yes.
Same.
Right, right. Probably there's, some cooking adventures I've gone on as well. That,
Mhm.
uh-huh. Um, so there are some things where I've learned to sort of understand that I have a filter that I need to temper a little bit.
With another approach, corporate communications professional Brian Handon talks about how seeing the risks can help you couch the negative into a better action plan.
I mean, you and I just talked. No one wants to be a pessimist.
Right.
No one wants to be a downer. I think what so I think I do couch it to a certain extent. Like we were going out with someone recently, and I wasn't going to tell my friends that, I'm worried about, I wanted to go out, but now I don't. I ended up having a great time, but no one
Right.
wants to be a jerk, or no one wants to be that downer. I think where I couch it, or where I've learned over the years, is how to couch it in terms of, to not just be that worrisome Eeyore, but to find ways to show how that risk, or those red areas, how that's actually a benefit. Like, okay, this might not, we might not want to go to this restaurant because that's going to be really busy at that time. How about we go here? Or how about we plan something else? So again, I think it's a way of turning that negativity into a positive.
Psychologist and talent agent Dr. Albert Bramante gives us tips for reducing the friction between ambition and achievement by not downplaying our past achievements.
The quote that I love from you is the phrase that you says, anyone feeling the friction between their ambition and their achievement.
Yeah.
Can you say more about how you see people using your book to reduce that friction?
Well, the main thing, a lot of people underestimate their achievement. They underestimate their what they've accomplished, or they'll downplay it. Or even forget it. And it's like especially when they're in a moment of self-doubt, like, I really didn't accomplish much, and then you have to break it down and say, well, look at all you've done, and you start listening to things, and then you'll hear a lot of times people say, well, I didn't really think of that. I don't remember that. Now it makes sense. Now you think about it, now they mention it, yes. Because we have filters in our perception. When we're in a spiraling mood or a depressive mood, we tend to only look at the limitations that we have, or the disadvantage that we face, rather than all of the good things we've done. We delete them, in a sense. We delete all the the good things that happen to us and all that. We only focus, or we only filter the bad. Or the negative.
It brings up one of my favorite suggestions from you, which is the happy file, to keep that evidence of the things that have gone right.
In our last two clips, we cover storytelling and advocacy, starting with filmmaker and philanthropist Peter Samuelson, who talks about using storytelling to open someone's heart and mind up to what you need help with.
Well, success in life, and this is also a pillar in the book, is storytelling. I believe that if you want to persuade someone of something, you have to be able to generate empathy by telling a story. And the story can be about you, or it can be about something that you passionately care about. But your goal is to inspire the other person to be with you, to empathize either with you or with when I pitch a film, I'm trying to make them really care about characters. But remember, when I'm pitching the film, we haven't made the film yet. There's maybe a script or maybe not even a script. So I'm selling care, I'm trying to put enthusiasm, passion, and empathy and caring and a willingness to cooperate into the mind of the other person, who is, if they work for a studio, probably very cynical and highly trained in the skill of saying no hundreds of times a week. And here I come along. So you have to create a bit of passion, because when someone's heart is moved, you made them laugh, you made them cry, you scared them, or you made them feel that empathy moment, those few minutes, and it doesn't last very long, that is when they are pliant. That is when they are flexible. That is when you can bring them along to do whatever this wonderful thing is that you would like them to help you with.
And then finally, activist and author Sam Daly Harris, presenting a great analogy about our political cynicism. It's like folding before the hand starts.
Futurist and climate activist. I think he's in the Seattle area. Never met him, but I quote him all the time. Alex Steffen said, in fact, these days, cynicism is obedience.
Following the herd, right?
Well, if I'm cynical, I'm obedient to the way things are. I'm not going to do anything.
Right.
Why would I, if nothing I do makes a difference? And if I could add one more, I didn't know this before when I was on that interview program, but since then I've met and had a chance to interact with a guy from Stanford, Jamil Zaki, who wrote a book called Hope for Cynics, The Surprising Science of Human Goodness. So anyway, he said, if you're cynical, it's like you're playing poker and you fold your hand before the game even starts.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.